His brothers and sisters, comrades, citizens, we are not just witnessing political theater. We are witnessing the slow, ugly unraveling of a political project that once promised to drain the swamp and instead became the swamp's most grotesque mutation. Donald Trump, the billionaire turned populist hero, is now facing the full consequences of his own contradictions. His political end is not coming because of some moral reckoning, nor because the system suddenly found its conscience. No, it is coming because the machinery he once exploited is now devouring him from within. Let us be clear, Trump was not an outsider. He was capitalism's Frankenstein, stitched together by corporate media, hedge fund billionaires, Wall Street tax breaks, and the angry frustration of a collapsing middle class. He rode a wave of justified rage. Rage at globalization, at wage stagnation, at the betrayal of the working class, but turned that rage into a weapon of division, not liberation. And now the tide is turning. Trump's rise was a product of systemic capitalist failures, not an anomaly. He didn't emerge out of nowhere, and he certainly didn't hijack the system from the outside. He was born from it, shaped by it, and elevated by its very core mechanisms. His wealth built on real estate speculation, tax avoidance, and inherited privilege was not a deviation from the norms of American capitalism. It was a glaring example of its logic. When a man who repeatedly filed for bankruptcy, cheated contractors, and inflated his own brand to deceive banks and media alike can still rise to the presidency. It tells us everything about the system that allowed it. The problem isn't that Trump broke the rules. It's that the rules were written for people like him. The media covered every outrageous tweet and every scandal not with outrage but with profit in mind. Trump's circus was good for ratings, and capitalism does not reward truth. It rewards attention, consumption, and spectacle. What we call news is not a public service in this structure. It is a business model. Trump understood that better than most. He didn't fight the media, he fed it. He gave it a narrative, a villain, a drama, and in return they gave him oxygen, platform, and legitimacy. At the same time, his millions of Americans were living through the fallout of neoliberal policies that had gutted their communities. Towns stripped of factories, families crushed by medical debt, students buried under loans for degrees that led nowhere. Trump spoke into that vacuum. He said, "I hear you. I see you. I'll bring your jobs back." He pointed fingers at immigrants, at China, at liberal elites. He never pointed at the bankers, the CEOs, the war profiteers, because he was one of them. But in a system so devoid of genuine representation, even false hope sounded revolutionary. When the working class is betrayed for decades by Democrats and Republicans alike, a demagogue becomes inevitable. He may speak lies, but if the establishment only ever gave silence, even lies sound like truth. This is what happens in a society where inequality is normalized. Where corporate power has consumed every aspect of governance and where wealth is the only passport to influence. Trump's entire career was a caricature of capitalism, branding over substance, death over labor, image over truth. He slapped his name on buildings he didn't build, products he didn't create, and movements he didn't understand. And still the system rewarded him, not because he offered value, but because he played the game as it was designed. When Trump boasted that he paid no taxes, people were rightly outraged, but the system allowed it. The tax codes were built for people with assets. His lawyers and accountants, not for people with wages, rent, and food bills. He didn't expose the system's flaws. He revealed its core truths. He was the perfect reflection of a society where greed is celebrated, where failure is privatized, but success is socialized for the rich, and where the myth of meritocracy hides the machinery of exploitation. Even his populism was a borrowed mask. There was nothing truly revolutionary about promising to build a wall while signing off on more tax cuts for the rich. There was nothing anti-establishment about handing cabinet positions to Goldman Sachs alumni. But the illusion worked because the traditional parties had long ceased to offer alternatives. When centrist politicians push austerity, his deregulation and free trade agreements that devastate domestic workers, the far right steps in with its poison and promises. Trump was not an invader into American politics. He was its natural progression. When capitalism fails to deliver, when it concentrates wealth in the hands of a few, when it destroys social mobility, and when it strips away labor protections, it creates fertile ground for authoritarian figures who offer scapegoats instead of solutions. This is what people must understand. His Trump is not a glitch. He is not an error to be corrected. He is the system's loudest success story. A man who climbed every rung that capitalism offered, even if he did it through fraud, manipulation, and media theater. To treat him as an isolated menace is to ignore the foundations that allowed him to exist. The real danger lies in thinking that if we remove the man, we fix the problem. We don't. The economic system that birthed Trump remains untouched. The financial elite who cheered his tax cuts still hold the reins. The corporations that funded both sides of the aisle still dictate policy. The inequality that gave him an audience still grows, and the political apathy bred by decades of broken promises still furs. That is the real crisis. His rise wasn't the fault of the voter. It was the failure of a society that abandoned its people and replaced collective welfare with individual hustle. Trump capitalized on a moment when people no longer trusted institutions because those institutions had earned that mistrust. The banks that crashed the economy walked away richer. The politicians who bailed them out promised change and delivered none. The media that claims to hold power accountable instead served breakfast every morning in the green room. In that vacuum of credibility, Trump said only I can fix it. And people listened not because they were foolishes, but because the system had left them desperate for any voice that wasn't laughing at their pain. We cannot understand Trump's rise without understanding neoliberalism's long deliberate dismantling of the social safety net, union busting, his deregulation, privatization. These were not accidental outcomes. They were designed by corporate strategists and implemented by politicians across the spectrum. They created a world where people work more and earn less, where public education is defunded, where healthcare is a commodity, and where every basic need becomes a profit opportunity. In that landscape, demagogues don't just emerge, they thrive. They say what others won't. They exploit every cultural division. They present the enemy as the other while never touching the true source of power. Trump mastered that playbook.